Okay, so everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's as relevant now as it was centuries ago: labor issues and the church's role in shaping them. We've got Miss Almeyda here with us, an expert on Catholic social teaching and labor history. Welcome to the podcast, Miss Almeyda.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to explore this very important topic today.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. When we talk about labor issues, what exactly are we referring to, and how do these relate to social justice?
Well, that's a great question. Labor issues focus on how workers are treated. Things like fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to organize labor unions. Development in the context means the growth of society in ways that ensures workers' dignity and rights are protected. And of all of this, ties into social justice, which is about fairness, equal opportunity, and standing up for those who are often marginalized in society.
Right, right. So, we're talking about basic human dignity here, no? Now, the Catholic Church has been involved in social issues for a long time. How has it historically influenced labor rights?
Um, well, the church has always been a voice for the poor and oppressed. Over the centuries, its teachings on human dignity and charity have shaped its stance on labor. The church has consistently advocated for fair treatment of workers and speaking out against exploitation, especially during moments of social upheaval, like what happened during the Industrial Revolution.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense, actually. So why should we look into the church's involvement in labor issues over time?
Well, by looking at the church's role, we can see how its teachings on labor have influenced social policies and the development on labor rights, Julian. Because it's a way to understand how the church had advocated for justice, workers, and social change, adapting to the changing times. Syempre, hindi naman what works before could not necessarily work for us now because the world is evolving and we have our needs are varying and they change.
All right. So let's go back a bit. What were the early Christian teachings on work and justice? And how did they impact labor rights?
Um, Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Oh, okay, it's okay. So, as we go back a bit, what were the early Christian teachings on work and justice, and how did they impact labor rights?
Ah, well, early teachings were all about honoring the dignity of work. So, if we go back nga to the basic, the Bible stresses about fair wages, honesty, inherent value of every person's work. So these teachings laid the underground work for modern labor rights, emphasizing justice and respect, particularly for the poor and the marginalized. Most often yung mga ating tinatawag na blue collar laborers.
That's very interesting. And in during the medieval period, how did monasteries and religious orders contribute to labor systems?
Alam mo, Julia, during the earlier times, yan, mga medieval period, even during the birth of the before the birth of the Renaissance and the Renaissance period proper, monasteries were major economic players during the medieval period. They produced goods through agricultural and craft work, and they cared for the welfare of the poor and the workers. The religious communities also promoted ethical practices and took a leading role in creating a culture of mutual care and support, especially in times of hardship o yung tinatawag nila pag famine or during winter na mahirap magtrabaho or seasonal yung trabaho ng iba.
That's really fascinating. And what about solidarity? How did religious orders foster a sense of solidarity among those workers?
Well, religious orders played a huge role in building solidarity by encouraging cooperation among workers. Monasteries would provide shelter, food to the poor, and guilds, often backed by the church, and helped workers organize and negotiate better conditions for their wages, for their working time, and for practically for their safety. It was also about building communities of support, which in turn led to a more ethical and just labor practices.
So the church was a big supporter of labor rights. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Kasi ganito, the church supported the creation of labor guilds, which were groups of workers with specific trades. Baker, blacksmith, butcher, farmers, fishermen. So these guilds weren't just about work. They were also about promoting ethical standards, which um brings mutual aid and solidarity. What the church did was it found a way to ensure fair treatment and provide spiritual and material support in a time when many workers were struggling.
I see. So now we can jump a bit forward. How did the Industrial Revolution impact labor, and why did the church take notice of this?
Um, well, the Industrial Revolution, as the word connotes, created a massive social upheaval. Factories grew quickly, but working conditions remained bad, even worse. Long hours, then low wages and unsafe environments led to exploitation. And the church, as an advocate of the poor, they took notice because it was clear that workers, including children, were being treated unjustly. This prompted the church to get more involved and advocate for change.
Right. So that's where Pope Leo the Eighth's Rerum Novarum comes in, right? What was its
Yes.
significance in this context?
Um, exactly. Rerum Novarum was issued in 1891. It was a game changer because it was the church's first major encyclical on labor and capital. It was Pope Leo the 13th who called for fair wages, workers' rights to organize and better working conditions. He rejected a lot of things like unregulated capitalism, exploited workers, socialism, and which the church at that time felt it threatened private property and the family. So, bale, it set the stage for social thought on labor rights.
Right. Sorry, it was actually Pope Leo the 13th, right? So what did Rerum Novarum say about workers' rights specifically?
Um, after Rerum Novarum, Catholic social teaching became more focused on worker solidarity and ethics of labor. Christian labor unions were formed, and Catholic social action groups started to play a large role in advocating for workers. These movements focused on fair treatment, better conditions, and creating a just economic order that balanced the needs of workers and employers. It was important kasi the dialogue between the workers and employers started opening up, and thus there was room for improvement and room for hearing each other's sides, hindi lang yung workers but also the employers.
And what about Christian labor unions in the early 20th century? How did they connect to Catholic social teachings?
Christian labor unions that emerged after Rerum Novarum were unique because they weren't just focused on economics. They were grounded in Catholic principles of solidarity, dignity, and justice. These unions emphasized moral responsibility and social ethics, advocating, as what we've been mentioning kanina pa, better wages, safer working conditions, and worker rights, while staying through with the Catholic values like human dignity and the common good.
It's really amazing to see how these ideas evolved over time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, Miss Almeida. It's very clear that the church's influence on labor rights and social justice is profound and still very much relevant today.
Well, thank you for having me too, Julianne. It's been a pleasure discussing how these teachings continue to shape labor movements and social justice in the modern world.
Yeah. Thank you to our guest speaker, Ms. Almeyda. And this part of our podcast will be dealing with the church's role on the 20th in the 20th century on the of the Catholic social teaching and labor advocacy. Um, Good day, everyone. Today we're diving into an important discussion about the Catholic Church's historical and ongoing role in labor rights and social justice. Our guest today is an expert on the said topic. May we all welcome Miss Angela Julian Espancho. Welcome, Miss Angela.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here po.
Yeah. To start the discussion, let's start with Quadragesimo Anno. This encyclical was issued in 1931 during a time of global economic turmoil. What was its significance in the church's advocacy for labor and social justice?
Okay, so for Quadragesimo Anno, it is built on the foundation of Pope Leo the 13th, Rerum Novarum. This emphasizes a lot about the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity in labor relations. So, for subsidiarity in particular, this asserts that decisions should be made at the most local level possible. So, to ensure this, the workers should have a voice, and that their dignity is very much well respected. And for solidarity, this complements this by fostering a sense of mutual responsibility between employers, the employees, and of course for the broader community.
Wow, that's fascinating, Mrs. Pancho. How did these principles translate into real-world labor practices?
So for the encyclical, this encouraged the formation of workers' associations and unions. This emphasized the importance of workers participating in in the economy, and not just as laborers but as active stakeholders as well. So this then meant that advocating for fair wages, safe working conditions, and opportunities for personal and professional growth as well.
It was more than just economic survival. It was also about human dignity, is it right?
Yes, absolutely. So with this, the church actually framed labor not merely as a means of production, but as a way for individuals to really express their creativity and to contribute to the common good.
Noted on that. Moving forward to World War II, how did the church address labor rights during such a tumultuous period?
So during this period, the wartime economy created a lot of immense challenges. So the factories were working around the clock to produce supplies, and many workers were subjected to a lot of exploitation. The church then stepped up in to advocate for the welfare of the workers, especially in wartime industries.
Wow, that's very true, Mrs. Pancho. What specific actions did the church take during the time?
The clergy and church organizations actually worked to ensure the laborers had adequate food, housing, and of course, rest. They also spoke out a lot against forced labor practices, particularly in occupied territories. For instance, a lot of Catholic leaders often mediated between workers and government to prevent such abuses.
Were the church's effort during that time made a tangible impact on the laborers?
Well, while results did vary a lot, the church's consistent moral voice helped to draw attention to the workers' suffering and served as a reminder of the ethical dimensions of wartime economy. So it really did a good job in laying down the groundwork for post-war labor reforms as well.
That was very nice of the church to do. Now, moving forward, let's turn to Latin America. where the church has had a profound influence, particularly through liberation theology. How did this movement connect to labor struggles?
So, in discussing liberation theology, this actually emerged in the mid 20th century. This emphasized a preferential option for the poor and marginalized. The labor movements were a natural extension of this focus, as many workers faced dire conditions in factories and on plantations as well.
Okay, that's good. How did the church support these movements?
Priests and bishops often aligned themselves with labor unions and grassroots organizations advocating for fair wages, land reform, and improved working conditions. So the church became a voice for the voiceless, urging governments and employers to adopt policies that respected the workers' rights.
Were there any specific examples of this advocacy of the church?
Absolutely. In countries such as Brazil and El Salvador, the church supported labor strikes and even risked conflict with authoritarians regimes to demand these social reforms. Like leaders such as Archbishop Oscar Romero became symbols of the church's commitment to justice, particularly in labor practices.
Wow, that must have been very dangerous work.
It really was. Many clergy members faced persecution, and some even gave their lives for the cause. Yet, their sacrifices underscored the church's unwavering dedication to the dignity of work and the rights of our laborers.
Yeah, very true, Mrs. Pancho. Um, this has been a very enlightening discussion from quadragesimo anno to wartime advocacy and the transformative role of liberation theology. The church's involvement in labor rights spans decades and continents.
Thank you so much. The church's role in advocating for labor rights reminds us that economic system must always serve the dignity of human person.
Yeah, a powerful reminder indeed. Thank you, Ms. Espancho, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Okay. Moving forward, we'll be discussing again with Mrs. Pancho about the church's advocacy for global solidarity and labor rights. Welcome again, Mrs. Pancho. We explore how the Catholic Church has evolved its advocacy for labor rights and global solidarity, particularly through landmark documents and organizations. Here again is Mrs. Pancho to join us as an expert of the said issue. Now, let's start with Gaudium et Spes, one of the most significant documents to come out of Vatican II in 1965. How did this pastoral constitution shift the church's approach to global solidarity and labor?
So Gaudium et Spes, this was really revolutionary because it emphasized the church's role in engaging with the modern world. It called for a focus on the dignity of every human person, particularly in the context of labor. The document highlighted the importance of fair working conditions and just wages as essential components of human dignity.
How did it address issues of peace and justice in the workplace?
The document explicitly connected labor justice with broader themes of peace. It argued that injustices in the workplace, such as exploitation or discrimination, are obstacles to genuine peace. So, by advocating for justice in labor relations, Gaudium et Spes promoted harmony within societies and also between nations.
True. So the church was linking social and economic justice to global peace.
Yes, that's right. So the church recognized the labor issues are not isolated. They're interconnected with societal well-being and international relations as well.
Hmm. Well spoken, Mrs. Pancho. Beyond documents, Catholic organizations play a vital role in supporting workers. Could you tell us about their contributions?
Yes, it would be my pleasure. So, organizations like Caritas Internationalis have been at the forefront of humanitarian efforts, supporting workers by providing resources, training, and of course, advocacy. These groups operate globally, helping workers fight for fair wages, ethical working conditions, and of course, protection from exploitation.
The said organization, can you give an example of their advocacy work?
Okay, so Caritas and similar organizations have been vocal proponents for fair trade, which this ensures that workers in developing countries receive just compensation for their labor. They've also pushed for legislation promoting ethical supply chains and also corporate accountability.
Wow, it sounds like they're bridging the gap between the church's teachings and real world action.
That's a really great way to put it. So, these organizations embody the church's commitment to the preferential option for the poor and marginalized, providing practical support alongside, of course, spiritual guidance.
Wow. This part, let's talk about the church's response to globalization and the effect on it on labor. Globalization has had a profound impact on labor markets. How has the church responded to the challenges it presents?
With this, the church has been very clear in condemning exploitation within global supply chains, such as unfair wages and unsafe working conditions. So, it has also been a leading voice in advocating for the rights of migrant workers who are often amongst the most vulnerable in the context of global economy.
Specific actions or policies has the church supported?
The church has called for international cooperation to protect workers' rights, emphasizing the need for fair labor standards across the borders. For instance, Catholic leaders have urged governments and corporations to ensure humane working conditions and equitable pay in industries reliant on outsourced labor.
How about migrant workers?
Migrant workers are a particular focus because the church advocates for their legal and also their social protection. They emphasize their contributions to both home and host countries. So, Pope Francis, in particular, has spoken out about the need to treat migrants with dignity and respect, both in the workplace and society at large.
Yeah. Mrs. Pancho, this discussion has been truly eye-opening. From Gaudium et Spes to the Church's global humanitarian efforts, it's clear that the Catholic Church has been a steadfast advocate for labor rights and dignity in a rapidly changing world.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mendoza. It's very essential to remember that labor justice is not just an economic issue, it's actually a moral one as well. The church's teachings remind us of the profound value of every worker and the need for systems that uphold their dignity.
Well said, Mrs. Pancho. Again, thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. Until next time again, take care and remember the importance of solidarity in all aspects of life.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been my pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Mrs. Pancho.
So, hello everyone. We now go on to the next segment of our topic of discussion, the modern day issues in labor, as well as the church's continued advocacy. But allow me to introduce our guest, labor expert Michael Mendoza, is joining us today to discuss the contemporary issues and how the church has continued to evolve on extending the needed help for labor sector.
Yeah. Thank
Good,
you, Ms. Almeyda.
good evening, Sir
Good evening.
Mendoza, Sir
Thank
Mike.
you. Good evening.
Um, so let's talk about the modern day labor issues. What do you think is the stand of the church on such issues?
Well, one of the concerns that the church observed, yeah, is the rise of the gig economy, wherein gig workers work independently for short-term contracts. While this kind of labor offers flexibility on the part of the worker, it shows that there would be no job security and may lead to exploitation on the said workers. The church, through the Catholic social teachings, ask for policies that will ensure fair treatment and safeguard such gig workers, prioritizing their dignity as workers.
Hmm. So gig economy and gig workers. I guess these are ito nga naman, since they are more seasonal or only when
Yes,
needed,
and part-time, actually,
their
part-time.
security of tenure are often um taken for granted. So anyway, um so my question about this is, how about the challenges in automation and artificial intelligence with regards to employment?
Um, with the advancement of automation and the introduction of artificial intelligence, the church advocates for a more balanced approach in considering the social impact of such advancements to labor. The church calls for the retraining and providing education programs that would help displaced workers to adapt to new roles and to safeguard their dignity amidst the technological advancement.
Okay. So on the issue on wages and working conditions, how does the church get involved on such issues?
Well, this has been a long time advocacy of the church. In regards to this, the church continues to support labor on the rights to equitable and fair wages for work done, which should be sufficient for them and their families. It is also necessary that labor can have access to benefits like healthcare and ensure safe and humane working conditions.
Okay. So do the church support the establishments of unions, labor unions, and collective bargaining?
Yes, yes. The church supports such labor movements. As such movements, the church's view on it is that it's a vital mechanism to protect workers' rights and for workers to have a bargaining chip for equity and fair treatment on their part.
I see. So let's go to the Laudato Si of the Pope on ethical behavior and environmental justice. What can you say about this, sir?
Well, the church, through Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, it discusses the relationship between labor practices and environmental stewardship, calling on governments and businesses to achieve ethical labor practices that gives regard to people and the planet. The church emphasizes the balance of sustainable economic development and at the same time prioritizes the people and the environment. With this, the church supports the adoption of sound labor policies that promote economic growth that does not give harm to the people and the environment. Such labor policies can lead to equitable distribution of resources, sustaining the welfare of the people, and uplift the workers' life. With this, the church shall continue to advocate for justice, dignity, and sustainable development for workers, adapting to help alleviate modern day labor issues and environmental concerns through the Catholic social teachings.
Okay, well, that's well said. Thank you for insights and informational discussions on this.
You're welcome, and I'm very glad to give insights on such issues.
Um, I'll allow you to conclude our podcast and our discussion today, Sir Mike.
Yeah, on behalf of the group, in conclusion, the Catholic Church has always been one of the institutions that has been advocating for labor, including the rights and dignity of laborers. It started with Rerum Novarum, the encyclical of Pope Leo XIII, which addresses the relationship of labor and capital, including the government and its citizens. Several encyclicals followed after Rerum Novarum, which also articulated the issues regarding labor and society. The church continued on its advocacy on labor, especially on different periods of crisis, such as in World War II, where forced labor was prevalent, to regional struggles like in Latin America, where laborers faced oppression, as most of them were poor and marginalized. The church has been deeply committed to promote justice, equity, and human dignity through Catholic social teachings, calling for fair wages, safe working conditions, and respecting the rights of laborers to organize unions, at the same time denouncing exploitation and labor misdeeds. With the onset of modern labor challenges like globalization, automation, gig economies, and exploitation of the vulnerable part of the population, the Church, through the Catholic social teachings, remains as a guiding light, focusing on the principles of human dignity for laborers and the poor, and solidarity. Such principles make for a framework for fair labor practices such as equitable wages and the rights of labor in developing economies and technological evolution. The Church's emphasis on subsidiarity and common will offers practicable solutions that ensure the fair treatment of labor and valuing their contributions to the economy. The Catholic Church has been an enduring part that helped labor in their fight for their rights and at the same time foster global development. In spite of modern day challenges in labor, the Church continues to commit to its advocacy on labor of reaffirming its role in building a more just and humane universal society. With that, we conclude our podcast. Miss Almeyda and Miss
Um,
Julia,
thank you guys. Thank you as well to our professor, Sir Carlo
thank you, Sir Carlo.
Tino, for all the assistance this semester. Thank you, and this has been our podcast discussion on labor and the church's social teachings. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you.